So, I'll be reading a few pages here and there of 3 of these books, so, yep, prepare for that. First, I'm starting with When Bad Things Happen to Good People. This book actually is the first religious book I read that was shitting on God and questioning, a lot of stuff. So, that's pretty cool. I don't necessarily think the dude is atheist. Pretty sure he's still religious. He probably does the second born thing or whatever. But this book is amazing. So, yep. Okay. Why I wrote this book. This is not an abstract book about God and theology. It does not try to use big words or clever ways of rephrasing questions in an effort to convince us that our problems are not really problems, but that we only think they are. This is a very personal book written by someone who believes in God and in the goodness of the world. Someone who has spent most of his life trying to help other people and was compelled by a personal tragedy to rethink everything he had been taught about God and God's way. Our son, Aaron, had just passed his 3rd birthday when our daughter Ariel was born. Aaron was a bright and happy child who, before the age of 2, could identify a dozen different varieties of dinosaur and could patiently explain to an adult that dinosaurs were extinct. My wife and I had been concerned about his health from the time he stopped gaining weight at the age of 8 months, and from the time his hair started falling out after he turned 1 year old. Prominent doctors had seen him, had attached complicated names to his condition, and had assured us that he would grow to be very short, but would be normal in other ways. Just before our daughter's birth, we moved from New York to a suburb of Boston, where I became the rabbi of a local congregation. We discovered that the local pediatrician was doing research in problems of children's growth, and we introduced him to Aaron. 2 months later, the day our daughter was born, he revisited my life in a hospital and told us that our son's condition was called progeria, rapid aging. He went on to say that Aaron would never grow much beyond 3 feet in height, would have no hair on his head or body, would look like a little old man while he was still a child, and would die in his early teens. How does one handle news like that? I was young and experienced rabbi, not as familiar with the process of grief as I would later come to be, and what I mostly felt that day was a deep, aching sense of unfairness. It didn't make sense. I had been a good person. I tried to do what was right in the sight of God. More than that, I was living a more religiously committed life than most people I know, people who had large, healthy families. I believed that I was following God's way and doing His work. How could this be happening to my family? If God existed, if He was minimally fair, let alone loving and forgiving, how could He do this to me? And even if I could persuade myself that I deserved this punishment for some sin of neglect or pride that I was not aware of, on what grounds did Aaron have to suffer? He was an innocent child, a happy, outgoing 3-year-old. Why should he have to suffer physical and psychological pain every day of his life? Why should he have to be stared at and pointed at wherever he went? Why should he be condemned to grow into adolescence, see other boys and girls beginning to date, and realize that he would never know marriage or fatherhood? That's a little ableist, maybe? It simply didn't make sense. Like most people, my wife and I had grown up with an image of God as well, all and wise, all-powerful parent figure who would treat us as our earthly parents did, or even better. If we were obedient and deserving, He would reward us. If we got out of line, He would discipline us, reluctantly but fairly. He would protect us from being hurt or from hurting ourselves, and would see it that we got to what we deserved in life. Like most people, I was aware of the human tragedies that darken the landscape, the young people who died in car crashes, the cheerful, loving people wasted by crippling diseases, the neighbors and relatives whose retarded or mentally ill children people spoke out in hushed tones. Oh yeah, they talk about these people in a hush-hush fashion, definitely. But that awareness never drove me to wonder about God's justice or to question his fairness. I assumed that he knew about the world more than I did. Then came the day in the hospital when the doctors told us about Aaron and explained that what progeria was. It contradicted everything I had been taught. I could only repeat over and over in my head, quote, "This can't be happening. It is not how the world is supposed to work. Tragedies like this were supposed to happen to selfish, dishonest people whom I, as a rabbi, would try to comfort by assuring them of God's forgiving love. How could it be happening to me, to my son, if what I believed was the world was true, if what I believed about the world was true?" I had recently about it. I had read recently about an Israel mother who every year on her son's birthday would leave the birthday party, go into the privacy of her bedroom and cry because her son was now 1 year closer to military service, 1 year closer to putting his life in danger, possibly 1 year closer to making her thousands of Israel parents who would have to stand at the grave of the child that fallen in battle. I read that, and I knew exactly how she felt. Every year on Aaron's birthday, my wife and I would celebrate. We would rejoice in his growing up and growing in skill. But we would be gripped by our cold foreknowledge that another year's passing brought us closer to the day when he would be taken from us. I knew then that one day when I could write this book, I would write it out of my own need to put into words some of the most important things I have come to believe and know, and I would write it to help other people who might one day find themselves in a similar predicament. I would write it for all those who wanted to go on believing, but whose anger at God made it hard for them to hold on to their faith and be comforted by religion. I would write it for all those people who love for God, for those for God and devotion to Him led to the blame themselves for their suffering and persuade themselves that they deserved it. There was not many books, as there was not many people to help us when Aaron was living and dying. Friends tried and were helpful, but how much could they really do? And the books I turned to were more concerned with defending God's honor, with logical proof that bad is really good and evil is necessary to make this a good world. They were with curing the bewilderment and the anguish of the parent of the dying child. They had answers to all those their own questions, but no answer for mine. I hope that this book is not like those. I did not set out to write a book that would defend or explain God. There is no need to duplicate the many treatises around already on the shelves, and even if there were, I am not a formally trained philosopher. I am fundamentally a religious man who has been hurt by life, and I wanted to write a book that could be given to the person who has hurt my life by death, by illness or injury, by rejection or disappointment, and who knows in his heart that if there is justice in the world, he deserves better. What can God mean to such a person? Where can he turn for where can he turn for strength and hope? If you are such a person, if you want to believe in God's goodness and fairness, you find it hard because of the things that have happened to you and to people you care about. And if this book helps you do that, then I will have succeeded in distilling some blessings out of Aaron's pain and tears. If I ever find my book bogging down in technical theological explanation and ignoring the human pain which should be its subject, I hope that the memory of why I set out to write it will pull me back on course. Aaron died 2 days after his 14th birthday. This is his book because any attempt to make sense of the world's pain and evil will be judged success or a failure based on whether it offers an acceptable explanation of why he and we had to undergo what we did. And it is his book in another sense as well, because his life made it possible and because his death made it necessary. So yeah, I like this book, and Nothing, I've never really lost anybody, like, well, I've lost, like, pets and that I would consider family members, but human-wise and stuff that matters to the society at large, when it's not just a misanthropic, like, crutch for people. I've never really lost a family member that I loved. Like, I still have my aunt and my uncle and my mom and such like that. You know, I probably do have family members that died probably back before I even really, like, knew of anything. So, yeah. It's weird. Usually people read a book like this because they can connect with it in some way. And I just connect with the overall message of standing up to God and being like, yo, why are you doing this? So, why do the righteous suffer? There is only one question which really matters. Why do bad things happen to good people? All other theological conversation is intellectually diverting, somewhat like doing the crossword puzzle in the Sunday paper and feeling very satisfied when you have made the words fit. But ultimately, without the capacity to reach people where they really care, virtually every meaningful conversation I've ever had with people on the subject of God and religion has either started with this question or gotten around to it before long. Not only the troubled man or the troubled woman who has just came from a discouraging diagnosis at the doctor's office, but the college student who tells me that he has decided there is no God, or the total stranger who comes to me at a party just when I'm ready to ask the hostess for my coat and says, quote, I hear you're a rabbi, how can you believe that? They all have one thing in common. They are troubled by the unfair distribution of suffering in the world. The misfortunes of good people are not only a problem to the people who suffer and to their families, they are a problem to everyone who wants to believe in a just and fair and livable world. They inevitably raise questions about the goodness and kindness and even the existence of God. I am the rabbi of a congregation of 600 families, or about 2,500 people. I visit them in the hospital. I officiate at their funerals. I try to help them through the wrenching pain of their divorces, their business failures, their unhappiness with their children. I sit and listen to them pour out their stories of terminally ill husbands or wives or senile parents for whom a long life is curse rather than a blessing, of seeing people whom they love contorted with pain or buried by frustration. And I find it very hard to tell them that life is fair, that God gives people what they deserve and need. Time after time, I have seen families and even whole communities unite in prayer for the recovery of a sick person, only to have their hopes and prayers mocked. I have seen the wrong people get sick, the wrong people be hurt, the wrong people die young. Like every reader of this book, I pick up the daily paper and fresh challenges to the idea of the world's goodness assault my eyes. Senseless murders, fatal practical jokes, young people killed in automobile accidents on their way to their wedding or coming home from their high school prom. I add these stories to the personal tragedies I have known, and I have to ask myself, can I, in good faith, continue to teach people that the world is good and that a kind and loving God is responsible for what is happening, for what happens in it? People don't have to be unusual, saintly human beings to make us confront this problem. We might not often find ourselves wondering, quote, why do totally unselfish people suffer, people who never do anything wrong? Why do totally unselfish people suffer? Yeah, because we come to know very few such individuals. But we often find ourselves asking why ordinary people, nice friendly neighbors, neither extraordinary nor extraordinarily bad, should suddenly have to face the agony of pain and tragedy. If the world were fair, they would not seem to deserve it. They are neither very much better nor very much worse than most people we know. Why should their lives be so much harder? To ask, quote, why do the righteous suffer, or why do bad things happen to good people, is not to limit our concern to the martyrdom of saints and sages. But to try to understand why ordinary people, ourselves and people around us, should have to bear the extraordinary burdens of grief and pain. I was a young rabbi just starting out in my profession when I was called on to try to help a family through an unexpected and almost unbearable tragedy. This middle-aged couple had one daughter, a brief 19-year-old girl who was in her freshman year at an out-of-state college. One morning at breakfast, they received a phone call from the university infirmary. "We have some bad news for you. Your daughter collapsed while walking to the class this morning. It seems a blood vessel burst in her brain. She died before we could do anything for her. We're terribly sorry." Uh, Stunned, the parents asked the neighbor to come in to help them decide what steps to take. The neighbor notified the synagogue, and I went on to see them that next day. That same day, sorry. I entered their home feeling very inadequate, not knowing any words that could erase their pain. I anticipated anger, shock, grief, but I didn't expect to hear the first words they said to me. Quote, Rabbi, we didn't fast last Yom Kippur. Why did they say that? Why did they assume that they were somehow responsible for this tragedy? We taught them to believe in a God who would strike down an attractive, guilted young woman without warning as punishment for someone else's ritual infraction. One of the ways in which people have tried to make sense of the world's suffering in every generation has been assuming that we deserve what we get. That somehow our misfortunes come as punishment for our sins. Tell the righteous, it shall be with them, for they shall eat the fruit of their deeds. Woe to the wicked, it shall be ill with them, for what his hands have done shall be done to him. Isaiah 3:10, 11. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slew him. Genesis 38:7. No ills befall the righteous, but the wicked are filled with trouble. Proverbs 12:21. Consider what innocent ever perished, or where have the righteous been destroyed? Job 14:7. This is an attitude we will meet later in the book when we discuss the whole question of guilt. It is tempting at one level to believe that bad things happen to people, especially other people, because God is a righteous judge who gives them exactly what they deserve. By believing that, we keep the world orderly and understandable. We give people the best possible reason for being good and for avoiding sin. And by believing that, we can maintain an image of God as all-loving, all-powerful, and totally in control. But the reality of human nature, given the fact that none of us is perfect and that each of us can, without too much difficulty, think of things that he has done which he should not have done. We can always find grounds for justifying what happens to us. But how comforting, how righteously adequate is such an answer? How religiously adequate? The couple whom I tried to comfort, the parents who had lost their only child at the age of 19 with no warning, were not profoundly religious people. They were not active in the synagogue. They had not even fasted on Yom Kippur, a tradition which even many otherwise non-observant Jews maintain. But when they were stunned by tragedy, they reverted back to the basic belief that God punishes people for their sins. They set their beliefs that their daughter's deaths had been their fault. Had they been less selfish and less lazy about the Yom Kippur fast some 6 months earlier, she might still be alive. They sat their anger at God for having exacted his pound of flesh so strictly, but afraid to admit their anger, for fear that he would punish them again. Fear had hurt them, and religion could not comfort them. Religion was making them feel worse.